All right. Hello. Yeah, let's start this. Um, my name is Jessica, and I will present to you this text, Ethical Non-naturalism and the Metaphysics of Supervenience by Tristram McPherson. And first, I have some disclaimers. First one is I had some dental surgery this week. That's why I am swollen and look like a pirate. And also, I have not done philosophy in this way before, so I'm probably projecting my continental thoughts into an analytical framework or vice versa, trying to make continental philosophy out of an analytical project. So please, I am inviting you to help me to notice when that happens, and also why it is a disadvantage to the method and task at hand to do so. I really want to learn how to do philosophy in this way. I look forward to do it and I want to be good at it because, yeah, it's a bit fun to create theory in this very distinct mathematical exact way. Uh, yeah, so I just start saying that. Um, so feel free to give your feedback that you think could help me to grow. I invite that type of critique. So let's go. I will try to make this less than 10 minutes. That's my ambition. And so I will explain the mission according to McPherson, as I understood McPherson, and I will add some own thoughts in the middle, and I will try to make it clear when it's me just going on a rumble. And then I will end with some questions for discussion, and maybe if there's time left, I will just freely express what's on my mind. Let's go. So the mission is to provide a solution for non-naturalists to support supervenience. And my guess is that McPherson wants to move on in this discussion and focus not on whether supervenience is true or how, but more like what kind of properties these ethical properties are and the metaphysics of supervenience. So he provides brute necessity as a solution for the non-naturalist, and in this paper he argues why they must do so. Because supervenience is a burden to non-naturalism, and Pearson has a solution. And what he does is he redefines supervenience and explains these properties, and then he introduces brute connection and why this is a necessity, and also referring to 300-year-old Humean claim. That's how he do it. So he starts on page 2, stating his claim, and I paraphrase, yes, ethical properties are supervenient. And 2, this means that non-naturalists are committed to the supervenience of the ethical being a metaphysically brute necessary connection between distinct properties. So brute connection meaning it's not explainable, it's just a law. It cannot be explained any further. It's just is. And the Humean modest perspective adds on with a twist here, because he stated that there can be no necessary connection between distinct existences. So how does this work together? If supervenience is true, but the connection is brute, but no necessary connection can exist between distinct properties, then the non-naturalists have some explaining to do. So McPherson moves on by defining non-naturalism and its boundaries by excluding other non-naturalistic views from this discussion, like the supernaturalist, expressivist, quietist, like doesn't want to mix up properties. So starting off with, okay, now let's do the properties. So the ethical properties in classical non-naturalism, according to Pearson on page 5, in favor for this future discussion, and the claim he wants to make is that the ethical properties exist and they are metaphysically cis generis, meaning unique. So ethical properties are distinct from, but reducible to, non-ethical properties. They are metaphysically continuous. So, okay, this is the foundation to move on with supervenience, that we have these properties. And it's a bit confusing here, I think, because they are distinct but reducible, but not the same. And as I understand it, is um, they could be reduced to non-ethical properties. But the reduction here doesn't mean that they could be reduced to each other as in deconstructed or connected, but that they are metaphysically continuous with each other in the way that they could be understood. So I understand Pearson's understanding of non-naturalistic ethical properties, like there is this sort of continuity between these cisgeneris and non-ethical properties, and that is just like they both exist, and that is what they have in common. Um, Goodness is not reducible nor necessarily connected to some other property that is having goodness. They are just like, okay, this exists here and this exists here. They both exist. This sounds very Heidegger to me. It's a bit messy, and yeah, I think this is why then Pearson comes up with a new definition of properties. And that is, so ethical properties, they are cisgeneris, meaning they might have nothing to do with these other properties that they supervene on, but then you have no other choice but to commit to the brute necessity. Like, it's just the way it is. We don't know how, um, but we have no other choice. The contingency and connection is the brute necessity. And then we can focus on supervenience as the relation, and we only have one thing to explain. Uh, and everything that is not an ethical property, we just call it base property. So then we can try this new improved version of supervenience, because some natural and physical aspects do not seem to have ethical value and therefore be irrelevant. Like we could just exclude those things, like things that doesn't have anything with goodness to do. They don't have to be in our property toolbox even. We just say, so now it's base properties and ethical properties. Brilliant. Mm, yes. Because continuing with his project here. So instead of this old crude supervenience, he presents supervenience, redefined, page 9. The crude supervenience states no metaphysically possible world that is identical to a second world in all natural respects can be different from the second world in its ethical respects. And this new definition is then no metaphysically possible world that is identical to a second world in all base respect can be different from the second world in its ethical respect. So yeah, this is a good thing, because then we don't have to discuss the natural things. So what is natural and what is not, and the natural, because the natural laws are nothing that we want to go with anyways, because the natural law is the same as a brute necessity. It's just a law. It cannot be questioned. It's fundamental. Um, yes. Okay. Um, yeah, and also what this does is that it limits the explanation. Like there's no need to explain everything everywhere all the time, but this is more limiting um, between properties, individual properties, not all properties. Um, the, And also here's a question mark, because there is a conflict that is asymmetric and it can continue forever because everything is supervenient on itself. But hey, says McPherson, why do you think our theory on supervenience must be explanatory? Maybe we just need to be able to further explain the metaphysics of the ethical. Now, with this new thing here, there are so many possibilities because we do not have to explain this relationship anymore. The metaphysical aspect is not an investigation of natural laws. Anyways, I already said that. So he moves on with this project and introduces a modest human perspective. And here's a tricky one, because that states that there must be no metaphysically necessary connection between distinct properties, because lots of non-identical properties aren't necessarily connected anyways. Interesting, I think. Why is Pearson bringing back David Hume, who stated stuff about causality and reduction about 300 years ago? Hume meant that there might not have to be a reason for things to happen. Distinct properties do not necessarily have to affect each other. It's just us humans making interpretations to explain and make sense of our existence. But the focus here. So we have the supervenience redefined, and Pearson says, so now the non-naturalist must take the properties to involve a brute necessary connection between discontinuous properties, because we have the ethical properties and we have the non-ethical properties, and there must be a connection, and this is a brute connection. That's the only solution. But with the modest human little conflict here, commitment to brute necessary connections between discontinuous properties counts significantly against a view. And this sentence here, I had a little hard time understanding it first, but what does also do this brute necessary connection is that it also questions the whole analytical project in a way, because the analytical philosophy wants to explain everything, and a brute necessary connection is not acceptable. We cannot just say, because that's the way it is, it's just a natural law. But the focus here is Hume's claim that there are no metaphysically necessary connection between distinct entities. Yeah, so it just makes this whole project again intangible, because then what about supervenience? Like now we have no explanation again. And what could explain it if supervenience is true? Well, brute necessity would. Okay, so my reflection here is that things are connected without being connected, and there is no problem. Like the apple is falling from the tree onto the grass, and the grass is green, and I water it with my hose. These things are connected, but they are distinct. They are distinct properties, which are connected. But like, okay, that's it. And distinct properties, according to Pearson, page 14, two properties are discontinuous just in case neither is reducible to the other and they are not identical or metaphysically continuous with each other. So if we cannot explain it with metaphysics, then what could? Because it doesn't say that there isn't any connection, but we don't know the connection. And we cannot just make up connections between distinct properties, because that's what the other philosophies are doing with experience and from a human, like adding interpretations. We cannot just make up things. So I also agree. This is an example on page 16 of this fantasy world, the second world, where an identical genocide is considered to be good, is, and I quote, moral revulsion, not a metaphysical incomprehension. And it points out something here, that we are not focusing on epistemological facts. It is something metaphysical that could explain this. Um, and then he adds on some contradictions. Supervenience of the ethical could be explained by ethical explanation or a conceptual or constructive metaphysical explanation. But then again, we use normative facts on normative facts, and we are not allowed to create connection between distinct properties however we want. So it's not ethical unique properties that are the problem here. It is the relationship to other properties. And that's why brute necessity is now a law. And we can move on because I think that's like we don't need to discuss how now. We want to know why. Uh, that is the connection that Chalmers seems to raise over and over again in this paper that we got. Why and not how, even though he also do not build a theory on why, but yet another how I found. Anyways, on to the questions. So this brute connection, can we accept brute connection as an explanation? Does brute connection provide an explanation for a non-naturalist explanatory gap? Or did it just create another explanatory gap? A gap to prefer, maybe? Can we move on to defining ethical properties now? And is that the project that we're on to? Or what are we doing here? Maybe that's my biggest. Okay, in what other analytical way can we define or explain brute necessity? In my view, brute necessity might be too entangable for the analytical project. And this is connected to my final question. Maybe it is derailing everything and should not be focused on. Can analytical philosophy claim anything about the metaphysics of supervenience? Um, yeah. And maybe this text that I luckily got is the least analytical one of every text we got for this week, which is very suitable. So these are the questions that I post, but also feel free to rewrite and redo my understanding. If I totally got things wrong weirdly, or maybe if there is, yeah, it's just very hard for me to translate this knowledge into numbers and mathematical formulas. Because to me, it just complicate things. And I think that this project is to make things easier and understandable for more people. Um, And how can we then explain brute necessity? I don't know if Pearson is doing a great favor here, but it would be very nice to explore the intangible in an analytical way, because in with phenomenology and all the other philosophy that I like just can continue with poetry and God and whatever to explain this. So we're at the void. Welcome.